Hi there. As a part of AgilePoint's version 10 release, we're happy to announce support for Claude. Now, this is a companion video. In the prior video, we highlighted how to connect to Claude using an AgilePoint access token and how to use the process activities. So as a result, this video will focus on the Claude control towers via a sample application. Okay, so we'll walk through the use case here in just a moment, but let's take a look at the control towers available for Claude. So like many other AI platforms, we have a couple of high-level categories. We have analyze an image and chat completion. You'll see both of those over the course of this video. But under both of these categories, you're seeing here we can also layer in dynamic process behavior. So as an example, analyze an image and adapt the flow, inject an ad hoc task, initiate a sub-process, or send a notification. And the same set of actions exist here for chat completion. So the use case for today is going to be an insurance claim application with a lot of the typical claim processing steps. The process will start when a customer has an accident and calls into the call center to relay initial details about their accident. The process flows externally where the customer can provide an image showing any damage to their vehicle and a more detailed accident description, and a number of internal steps. So before we walk through the configuration, let's quickly understand the role of each agent. So first, we have an image classification agent, which will analyze the customer-provided image showing damage of the vehicle and determine the portions of the vehicle that were damaged. This agent will then hand its insights over to our claims analyzer agent, which will analyze the outputs from our image classifier and compare that against the description of the accident provided by the customer. Now, our fraud predictive agent takes the insights from the prior two and makes a final fraud determination. If fraud is likely, we'll stop the typical processing and inject additional levels of review for our fraud investigation team. So as you're seeing here, this is using the Analyze Image Control Tower. Now the image will be passed from the customer step where they provide the image showing damage to their vehicle. So that'll be uploaded onto our form and then transferred into our boxed repository. So you're seeing here, we have the dynamic folder path. But of course, we can always leverage any of the out-of-the-box repositories. Now, as the next step, I've selected how I'm connecting into Claude and the model that I'd like to use. Now, notice in my case, the use model configured in the access token has been grayed out. This is a really handy feature for ongoing manageability because it does centralize model selection at the access token level. I didn't go down that route, so as a result, I do have a number of models I can select from. And of course, I've set some initial model parameters. Now, under the system instructions, let's move in here. As you're seeing here, the overall goals and mission are to analyze an image of a vehicle that's been in an accident and to identify damage at specific points of the vehicle. The skills include computer vision, damage detection, visual inspection, JSON formatting, and so on, and to make a rules-based decision as to whether specific parts of the vehicle have been damaged. Now, from an input perspective, we are passing an image from the form. Various instructions. So what you're seeing here are that we need to return a structured damage assessment on different portions of the vehicle. You'll see this come in later on as a part of our application. Various quality verification steps. And the output is going to be a JSON structure. And I've prescribed that schema here. Now under the triggering event, that is one of the main differences here between the control tower and an inline process activity. The control tower is an event-driven framework. So here, as you're seeing, this control tower will fire when the customer engagement step has been completed. And down below, I can always set additional filter conditions. Now, nothing here from a request mapping perspective because we are passing that image from the form. But you're seeing here the response. So if you recall, what we want is a damage assessment for the distinct portions of the vehicle that we've identified. So we can go ahead and map that back to our application. Now, in my case, no parsing required. If I did store the response in a variable and wanted to parse out certain elements, I have various means of doing so here. And then nothing from an actions perspective because we just want the output of this vision model. Now for our final two agents, the claims analyzer agent and the fraud predictive agent, the configuration is very similar, though the fraud predictive agent does introduce dynamic behavior as a part of this application. So we'll go ahead and walk through this one. Okay, so again, I've connected into Claude, specified the model, and then moving into my system instructions. Here, this is more about looking at the overall claim as a whole. So we're going to analyze the totality of the claim and look for fraud. The skills here include insurance domain understanding, fraud pattern detection, analysis, rules-based reasoning, and clear, explainable decision making. The input are going to be the details of the policy itself, various instructions, quality verification, and the output. So this is really about putting guardrails around how we determine whether fraud is likely in this claim. And we're seeing here the structure that we'd like to use. Okay, so next that brings us to the triggering event. So this will kick in when the wait for milestone activity has been completed. But again, I can bring in additional filter conditions. Now, from a request mapping perspective, what AgilePoint has done here is brought over the JSON structure from my system instructions so that I have a very straightforward mapping. Now, the response, again, is going to be a JSON structure, which I can map back to my application. In this case here, we're going to receive a fraud prediction and a probability. No parsing required. And then finally, the actions. So how we want AI to impact our process, this is all being set up here as well. So in the event that fraud is likely, I want to go ahead and ad hoc initiate a new sub-process that we don't have as a part of our application design. And I have set up some filter or trigger conditions. So in the event that it's a fraud claim, if our fraud prediction is equal to true, and the probability is higher than 50%, or we suspect that this might not be a human authentic report. So for instance, this might have been submitted by a large language model as an example, or when key conflicts exist between what comes back from our vision agent versus what's shown in the description of the accident. Okay, so when those scenarios are true, we're going to go ahead and invoke this dynamic sub-process, which brings in additional levels of review for our fraud investigators. Okay, so now that we understand how the application works, how to configure the various control towers and introduce dynamic behavior, let's go ahead and run the application. So kicking the process off, I'm going to play the role of the call center employee. A customer has just had an accident, they've called in and want to open up a new claim. So I've gone ahead and brought up their policy ID, specified the vehicle and driver involved in the accident. We'll capture initial details about the accident. Now recall that the customer will be prompted to provide more detail in the next step. Witnesses, prior claim history, and lastly, we'll leave a comment and open up our new claim. All right, so our process has just kicked off, so now we can track it in real time. All right, so we're now sitting with the customer step. So I can move over to my inbox and play the role of the customer. Now here, I'm going to provide an image showing damage to the vehicle that will be fed into our image classification agent and a more detailed accident description, which will be processed by our claims analyzer agent. Okay, let me bring over the image that we're going to use. So as you're seeing here, pretty clear damage to the front of the vehicle. So let me upload that. Now while that's uploading, we'll move down towards the bottom And what I'd like to do here is introduce very clear conflict between what's shown in the image and the more detailed accident description. And again, these are all details that will be fed in to our claims analyzer agent. So rather than the front of the vehicle, I'm going to indicate that the back of the vehicle was damaged. And we'll move this forward. So now we're going to see one by one the various control tower indicators go off, starting with our image classification agent, following with the claims analyzer, and then finally our fraud predictive agent, which in the event that fraud is likely, will adapt the typical processing, pause the normal flow, and inject additional levels of review for our investigators. Okay, so all three of those indicators have just gone off, which means the typical next step would be with the claims handler. Now, in this case here, if I try to open this, because fraud is going to be likely, that typical processing will be paused. So as I open this up here, I'll be met with a warning indicating fraud is likely with an 82% level of certainty, and that we've injected additional steps. So we'll have to revisit that once our exception has been handled. So moving back into my task list, not only do I have the claims handler step, which we just tried to open, I now have a fraud alert. So a task has been routed to a subject matter expert where we can review all of the insights uncovered by AI and determine how best to move forward. So obviously we have the image that was supplied previously. We have the outputs from our image classification agent, clearly identifying damage to the front of the vehicle, and the outputs from our claims agent. So what we're seeing here is this is a human authentic report, perhaps a non-native speaker based on the grammatical mistakes. But there are a number of key conflicts, right? Again, we showed in the image damage to the front of the vehicle, whereas the description indicated damage to the back of the vehicle. Okay, now as a next step here, I have the option to accept or reject the suggestion made by the control tower. So though AgilePoint's control tower can work autonomously, we've brought a human into the loop to approve the suggestion. So what you're seeing here is I'm going to go ahead and inject a new task for myself using the investigation step. And I want to keep the lock on all of the downstream steps until that newly injected task is completed. So now behind the scenes, AgilePoint's engine is injecting yet another new step into our process for the fraud team. We're seeing that task now show up in my inbox. So now playing the role of the investigator, I can leverage my domain experience in this industry, obviously all of the insights that AI has uncovered. But moving over to the investigation tab, I'll take an offline action to review and validate the fire and police reports, and then make a determination as to how this claim should move forward. Now, I could always reject this claim, as fraud might be the case, but in my experience, this is probably just a customer who's a bit frazzled after having had an accident. So I want to go ahead and send this claim for further processing and essentially allow the normal process to resume. In closing, I do want to highlight that whenever we have a control tower take action against our application, we have multiple ways that we can understand those actions. So here within the process tracker, I have a piece that will show me what actions were taken by the control tower and why. But these details are always available in a textual format in Manage Center. So if I move into Manage, we have the instance here that we've just run through. You'll notice here a dedicated tab for the AI control tower. Now, taking a look at our fraud predictive agent, you're seeing here, we can always see all of the inputs and outputs, actions that were taken against this process by our AI control tower. So in closing, that's going to conclude the content for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon.